Hi, my name is Anai,
And I'm Olivia.
and this is episode 0 of So You Grew Up in the Suburbs. So, we are using this episode as an introductory episode just to give background and of us and then to give context for why we are starting this podcast. So, like I said, my name is Anai and I am 20 years old and I'm a vocal performance major on the West Coast. So, I'm pretty involved with music. And I grew up in a suburb here in Missouri and I was born in San Antonio, Texas, but I have lived my whole life in Missouri. I am Latina and I have been raised by a single mother. And as far as religion, I have a mix of religions. I grew up in the Baptist church, but the Mexican side of my family is very devout Catholic, so I have roots in both religions. And I want to take this time to acknowledge the privilege that I have had to grow up in the suburbs and acknowledge the privilege that it was to grow up in a religion that is a majority here in the Midwest and in Missouri. And I want to say that I am here to encourage and support the voices that deserve to be heard, and I'm here to educate and have discussions about these important topics.
And my name is Olivia. I am 21 years old, and I also grew up in the same suburb with Anai. So I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and I've continued to live here and attend college in the city. I'm a music education major, and I would like to teach choir or general music someday, actually, like within a year, because I'm going to be graduating in a year, which is so crazy. I'm white. I was raised by a single mother, but my parents also shared joint custody. I grew up in the Pentecostal church, which is a denomination primarily based on the manifestation of the Holy Spirit within people. My grandparents pastored this church for 35 years and then retired after my grandma became ill. I now consider myself Christian and belong to an Assembly of God church. I want to acknowledge my white privilege, and I just am here to give my platform to others and mostly just to educate. Education is sort of my passion, so that's kind of why I wanted to participate as well. And I also do want to acknowledge that I definitely had religious privilege growing up, as Anai said, growing up in the majority here. Like I said, I just want to uplift voices of those that deserve to be heard, and I want to listen and learn as well.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about us. And now to kind of discuss why we wanted to start this podcast and the goal of the podcast. So as of right now, as we're recording this, it is July of 2020. In March, we were sent home from college due to COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the time that we have been home from college, the Black Lives Matter protests are still happening across the nation. And they were pretty strong for a few weeks. And they were strong a few weeks ago, and that's when I had this idea to start this podcast. So basically what happened was, after I had talked to my friends and my family, I realized that people in the suburbs were really confused about current issues, and myself included. And I wanted to be able to create a platform where people could get information in terms that they're familiar with, and also be able to share stories. And we have found that when people share stories, it makes them a lot more memorable. And also another thing that I realized was that the news doesn't cover a lot of the stories and topics that are happening here in the Midwest and in the suburbs. And we all know that there's actually a lot that goes on here in the suburbs and in the Midwest. And some of these things are very serious and they need to be discussed. So we also wanted to provide that information, but also to give our listeners the tools to have these important discussions amongst each other, and or with their families.
And when Anai came to me with this idea, I immediately loved it, but my goal and mission in mind was just wanting to create a safe place where people can ask questions and get valid information and just feel safe and be able to grow. Something unique to the suburbs, I feel like, is sort of how our education is, or I guess just in America in general, how our education is sort of skewed towards a certain bias or certain side or something, and we just kind of want to give sort of a more fuller idea, more full picture idea. We also want to applaud just acknowledging that you were wrong and growing from that experience. If you can learn new information and then just say, oh, I was wrong, that's kind of what this is for, and just kind of targeting an audience that we know might not have the full picture. So we've got some important things to talk about, and some of our next episodes are going to have really interesting topics and things that we felt were important, especially to the suburbs. So our first episode is going to be about the Black Lives Matter movement, because that to us feels the most timely and important. We're going to talk about the mission, the goals, her story, and how to participate and get involved. But we've also interviewed one of our friends from the suburbs, and then we also have a lawyer with the NAACP that we have interviewed as well.
Yeah, and he's actually the president of the Missouri NAACP chapter, so very excited to present that information.
Yes. Yeah. And our episode after that, we also kind of want to talk about climate change, what to know, how to talk about it, how the expansion of the suburbs have contributed to the urgency of this matter, sort of who creates the problem and who suffers from the problem. They're actually different groups, so we want to talk about that. We also want to talk about how to be open-minded, how to grow from what you were taught, and, how to, we both lived in the city after living in the suburbs. And so kind of that idea of like separating what you really believe from what you've been taught, and, where are they similar, where are they different, kind of aligning your values and your beliefs. We also want to talk about education. We want to talk about suburban education specifically. The problems within, stories of discrimination that are swept under the rug, and how to go about change, local change, that we have seen kind of develop within our own hometown. So, keep listening for the first full episode of So You Grew Up in the Suburbs.